Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. In the name of Allah, the most beneficent and merciful, I welcome you to the screening, the film screening of A Thin Wall, a documentary by Mara Ahmed, an American Pakistani. I welcome you to Jinnah Auditorium at TVapex headquarters. This is Arif Malik, Executive Director of World Congress of Overseas Pakistanis. I welcome our Board of Governors, our co-chairman, our president, our members. At the same time, panel of experts, those who are here today to comment on this amazingly insightful documentary. Now, walls are very interesting construct. We build walls because we want to feel safe. We want to feel secure because we want to keep to ourselves sometime. And we build walls because we want to avoid sometimes what is beyond those walls. Now, these walls, psychologically, sometimes they weave a cobweb around us, something that can be very strong or something that can be very weak. Mara Ahmed's documentary explores a historic construct. The biggest migration of the 20th century. That was when, when India was divided into Pakistan and India in 1947. So that was the time when the biggest migration of the century happened. And that was the time when hundreds and thousands lost their lives. This particular program is being organized in connection with World Congress of Overseas Pakistanis celebration of Pakistan Day, 23rd of March, 1940. As we recently celebrated the Pakistan resolution, and after approximately 2 to 3 weeks' time, we are having this documentary. The purpose is to discuss the questions, the burning questions, the vital insights, why we struggle to achieve a separate homeland. How are we achieving the purpose? What this particular historic, momentous occasion created, and what is actually still the fallout. This will be discussed by our experts. We have 2 experts today. We have Tariq Suleiman from SOAS, University of London, and we have Dr. Shahid Siddiq. Both these experts will be commenting once the documentary has been screened. So I'll be inviting our President, World Congress of Overseas Pakistanis, United Kingdom President, Dr. Sohail Chughtai, to come over and briefly welcome. And then we start with the screening, and the rest of the program follows. And your big round of applause, Dr. Sohail Chughtai.
Thank you, Arif Malik. Thank you very much. Shah Sahib, with your permission, our chairman, co-chairman for World Congress of Overseas Pakistanis, and we have the privilege of member of the Board of Governors, Chaudhry Mahboob Hussain, and also Mr. Naveed Ahmed. I think it's wonderful to have you all. It's a small gathering, but I still love the people who are watching it with conscious mind. It's great. The topic is, what is the effect of mass migration? What sacrifices can be given when people move from one place to another? And this is beautifully depicted in Thin Wall. Mara Ahmed has done 3 movies. Thank you for correcting me. I thought you did 2 movies, but it's 3rd movie. And she's going to do that in Belgium and Ireland from this area. But we have the privilege of doing it first in Europe. And World Congress Overseas Pakistanis is trying to do its best to make sure that the message to generation goes across. This movie is not going to be watched here only. Eventually, we'll take permission of Mara Ahmed at some time to share on TVapex for our online viewers at some stage. So I welcome you all, and let's take a start. And I give it back to Arif Malik, to make a start to the movie. Thank you very much again, all of you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. As we discussed the format, we're going to screen the movie in first place. But before we go to the movie, we're going to invite our special guest, the creator of the movie, to actually describe briefly, but at the same time insightfully, what triggered her to go for this particular concept, which has been so artistically filmed. Our guest from the United States of America, Mara Ahmed, who is also the director of the documentary. I'll be requesting Mara Ahmed to come over, briefly share her insights, and then we start with the screening. With your big round of applause, Mara Ahmed, please.
Thank you very much for having me here. It's an honor to screen the film and to have a lot of Pakistanis, albeit living in Europe, but still to have people who are originally from Pakistan view the film and to see how they react to the film. So I'm really looking forward to your comments and questions after the film. And just very briefly, this is my third film. It took me 7 years to make it, which is unusual. I usually make films in 2 years. But it's a collaboration with an Indian filmmaker who's based in New Delhi. And because of that collaboration, it's actually an international collaboration. The animator we worked with is based in Moscow, Russia. John Siddique's poetry, who is a British Pakistani poet, is also included in the film. So you will see the film has a lot of different moving parts and components. And so it took us a while to bring everything together and to produce the film. So I hope that you enjoy it, and if you have any questions or comments, I will be very happy to hear them after the screening. Thank you.
Thank you, Mara Ahmed. So once you're watching the movie, please hold your questions, and after the screening, we're going to have the session with your comments and questions with the director and along with the experts' comments.
क्योंकि जब हमारी गवर्नमेंट कॉलेज की सेंटेनरी थी तो उन दिनों हम वहाँ एमए कर रहे थे, तो उस सेंटेनरी पे इंडिया से बेशुमार लोग आए थे, जो एक्टर्स वगैरह हैं, जो आजकल वहाँ जनरल्स हैं और बड़े बड़े ब्यूरोक्रेट्स हैं. तो वो अपनी स्पीचेस में यही कह रहे थे कि लाहौर तो हमारे लिए पेरिस है और हम तो लाहौर से बहुत प्यार करते हैं.
उनका मुझे अब तक चेहरा जो है ना रोने वाला ही याद. बट माई फादर ही केप्ट ऑन सेइंग हम वापस आएंगे, हम वापस आ जाएंगे ना, आप फिक्र ना करें.
There were separate drinking facilities for the Hindus and for the Muslims, and would be clearly written, the Muslim water, Hindu water. It was something like apartheid, you see, apartheid in South Africa or wherever.
उससे आगे भागी जाना तो कोशिश करना तो कुआं में छलांगे मार देना, उसको मैं बहुत डरी.
Protect from yourself from anybody, from your brothers even. In very small sentence he said this thing, can look at that and remain steady.
हम करनाल आए तो वहाँ बड़ा हैजा फैला हुआ, जिहड़ी नहर है ना करनाल वाली, सारियां लाशां तैरदियां पईयां.
I had this perpetual dream for as long as I can remember. I was back there in the lost landscape of my childhood. Everything was the same, but also a little bit different, in a disturbing way.
बेटा वो जगह नहीं थी, जितना कुछ देखा है इधर आके, लेकिन वो साइड बड़ी बहुत खूबसूरत थी, पाकिस्तान।
The thought that kept coming back to me again and again for years to follow was that if the partition had not taken place in 1947, I would have been born on that side of the border. That land would have been my home.
Mara Ahmed managed to touch our hearts. We smiled many times. We cried many times as well. I see many people with wet eyes while going through this journey. And why? Because most of us sitting over here today, we are also migrants. So when they are reflecting over, reminiscing over, thinking about the homes and the places and the streets they left behind, I could see most of you actually taking the journey down the memory lane, in fact. And that's the beauty. So what a pleasant and unforgettable memory it has been. So I think Mara Ahmed deserves a thunderous round of applause, perhaps from all of us. Well done, Mara Ahmed. Now, Pakistan is a reality, like India is a reality. And both the countries have actually treaded decades now since 1947. So this is the time when we both of us, we shouldn't be actually having any kind of complexes or insecurities about being who we are. At the same time, we can construct. Now, particularly taking that route or talking about that particular aspect, we have two experts with us. Both are think tankers. They are fully conversed with this particular topic. So they would have brief comments, 3 to 4 minutes comments from both of them, and then Mara Ahmed and the Q&A. So I'll be inviting, in first place, Dr. Shahid Siddique, who is Chief Executive of Love Beyond Borders, a think tank, and at the same time, Dr. Shahid Siddique is a medical consultant. He also lectures at the University of Warwick. But interestingly, he is engrossed into peacemaking and India and Pakistan as a subject, which is quite a diversion, but I think it's a very pleasant diversion. So Dr. Shahid Siddique, for a brief comment over the documentary. Let's invite him over here.
Assalamu alaikum. Thank you, Arif Sab, for that wonderful introduction. And thank you, Mara, for coming from all the way from the USA and for this effort and for your emotion for peace and for your appreciation of the pain that people have suffered and your desire to reduce this pain for the future. And I think I'll make a couple of comments about this documentary. Wonderful, fantastic effort. And I think you said it took you 7 years. I think the most important thing that this documentary does is that when you read about partition in history books, you know, it's how Radcliffe drew the line and how many people were transferred from this side to the other side and what the politicians said. But you don't see, what you don't see in the history books is the human cost, is the pain and the suffering that the people went through. And now we are approximately 70 years down the road from partition. In another 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, these survivors of the partition will disappear, will not be with us anymore. And to record and to document the feelings that they experienced and the horror that they witnessed, this will live on. And I'm sure this will help the future generations in understanding these events. And another very important thing that this documentary does, I think sadly, this type of conflict, this was not a one-off event. Human history is littered with these events. So many genocides have happened before 1947, and sadly, even after 1947, human beings have the ability to inflict brutality on other human beings. And if you look at how social psychologists view group conflict, narratives develop within your own group. So within your own borders, within your own group, you develop a narrative where you fear the other, where you feel that the other has committed injustice against you, where you have these feelings of helplessness, where you have these feelings of vulnerability, and where you have this sense of self-righteousness. We are right. We didn't do anything wrong. They were the barbarians. They killed us. What this documentary does is it shows to you that not only are we vulnerable and not only were we the victims, but we were also the perpetrators. We can do both. We can be right. They can be right. We are scared of them, but they can also be scared of us. And I think it is this ability to appreciate other human beings, not to classify them as enemies, but to see them as human beings, that can lead to the resolution of group conflict. So I think these are two important ways in which this documentary furthers the cause of peace. So thank you very much for making this documentary. Thank you for coming, and may I request Mr. Tariq Suleiman to make a comment.
Thank you. It's you can look at it from different perspectives, but I think it's a project which you have taken over, which started, I think, probably one of the greatest historians in oral history, Urvashi Butalia. You have seen Ritu Menon and Kamla Bashin. If the pain you mentioned, and even one of the characters, they used the Punjabi phrase that "kook uthdi hai." That remind me of Parveen Shakar's one verse. By the way, Mara Ahmed has started her artistic journey through poetry at early age. So, but with apology to Parveen Shakar से माज़रत के साथ का एक शेर है, बिखरे ऐसे के जिगर आँख से कट कट के बहे. That's a slightly change in her verse. बिखरे ऐसे के जिगर आँख से कट कट के बहे, एक नजरिया है कि रोने नहीं देता मुझको. बिखरे ऐसे कि जिगर आँख से कट कट के बहे, एक नजरिया है कि रोने नहीं देता मुझको. I think it's one of the things which it tells us is that partition in subcontinent is an unfinished business, and it will continue to be unfinished business because it's an ongoing process. And until and unless we go beyond the political historiography and go into that post-colonial oral history, which you just saw, a different dimension of that. You cannot capture that. The very essence of that division of hearts, which Urvashi mentioned, it's not partition of the territory, it was partition of hearts. In that context, I just want to bring one other aspect, rather highlight one other aspect, which is that in Pakistan, even Mara's mother, if we hear her very closely, we still feel that there's some kind of justification for that partition still lingers on. And we still are reminded that this sacrifice was probably inevitable, and we could not have what we had without that. And we have not come to the question yet that what we have is really what we needed, and we needed to have it. But in terms of oral history, I just want to mention a couple of things. That history from the perspective of from the standpoint of its victims has not been written yet to the extent which can make us realize the price we paid for partition. In Pakistan, we have not even come to terms with the very idea of questioning the migration, the price we paid, the partition. And it reminds us another thing which again Mara mentioned, that the power of the idea of homogenizing a nation state, and we should not underestimate. And I hope that with this documentary, once it's shown in Pakistan, we might start a debate on these particular issues. And unless and until we have those debates, I don't think we can go beyond that. And the last sentence where you finished that, until we dream it. And what exactly are we dreaming it? That's very important, because it seems that even from that documentary, which has been very complex, it has brought out so different layers of those experiences and issues, that facts are not facts. They can be dissected and seen in different ways. Are we just looking at the easing of border restrictions? Is that what we are dreaming? Yes, at this stage, even that much seems so big that we think that even if we can have that much a dream come true, that would be quite a lot. And hopefully we'll be able to go beyond and dream further. I congratulate Mara for making such a wonderful documentary. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Being a psychologist, taking some liberty with the idea. In fact, I could bore you and I can explain that how this particular concept of migration relates to our micro level, our macro level, our exo level, or our meso level. But then to make it simpler, like it's an individual level, person's family, the place you are, your clan, your relationship with your ecosystem, and then the relevant country, the public policy, then the macro system, where we're talking about the bigger ecosystem. Now, everything is disrupted once this happens. And when it is violent, then it totally ruptures our psychology. And as we can see, as we can learn from these stories. Now, as Tariq said, what we are dreaming about, probably I could share here that probably we could dream about what the founder of nation, Jinnah, Muhammad Ali Jinnah, said. He envisaged friendly relations like the United States and Canada. That's on record. But then, yes, things happened. We have a baggage of history. But we all could dream, and we could work towards that. Now, to take it further, I have the privilege of inviting Mara Ahmed herself. Let's congratulate her for her wonderful work, and at the same time, she has raised questions. That is one of the main purposes of this documentary. Now, if you have a comment, we have got very learned and insightful people sitting over here. I would encourage if you could comment, if you could share some further insight on the topic. It'd be lovely to get this whole dialogue going further. So with your big round of applause, let's welcome Mara Ahmed, and then the comment session begins.
I think, first of all, congratulations. I think you've done a beautiful job. It's a very complex documentary, and it has so many different layers, so many different interpretations. However, coming to what Dr. Tariq Suleiman said, and I think for me the most important moment in the documentary is related to your mother. In the first part of the documentary, they're all talking about their good childhood days, reminiscing about how beautiful it was in India, their gardens, their homes and everything. And again, everyone was basically also telling us about how tolerant was the culture between Hindus and Muslims. And yet your mother makes a very important comment in that documentary when she tells us that the moment Jinnah and Gandhi started propagating their different ideas, we suddenly realized we were different.
Yeah.
So the grounds of partition were laid much before the actual partition. Yeah. In their minds already, the divisions were created. So for me that's very significant, that's very also disturbing on a certain extent, that on one side you're living in a very tolerant culture, and then once you've heard a certain rhetoric which is being propagated by a certain leader, and suddenly one day you get up and realize that we are different and now we have to move on. So in a way, that particular statement from your mother also somehow justifies the concept of partition. That is one question. And then in the end, again, they are talking about there should not be any divisions and there should not be any borders. But then our generation was not really experienced the pain, the torture of the partition. How can we possibly go back and talk about those old and great times and tolerant times? So, as I said, that for me, any piece of work which, instead of resolving the issue, leaves a lot of questions, for me that is a good piece of work, because it makes you ponder, it makes you think about things that you've not previously thought of before.
Yes.
So if you could like to comment.
Well, I agree with you that there are no easy answers to things which involve human beings, because human beings themselves are very complicated. I know we have a lot of psychiatrists, psychologists in the audience, so they can certainly vouch for the fact that human beings themselves are very complex, and human beings themselves have a lot of contradictions within themselves. So yes, it's a kind of contradiction that on the one hand, the culture seemed to be very tolerant. My mother's family, Muslim family, living in the middle of a Hindu neighborhood and feeling completely safe, in that environment. But on the other hand, yes, there was this breaking away that happened prior to partition, where my mother's family was always very involved in politics. So they were big followers of Gandhi, and like she mentions, my grandmother stopped wearing anything made in Britain, because Gandhi was saying we must boycott, products that are made in Britain, and we must use local products. And my grandmother was very involved in that movement. So they were very much involved in the movement for independence. But at one point, when the Muslim League started making demands for more representation of minorities and more autonomy, and that those demands were not met with any kind of negotiation but were rejected out of hand, then they did feel, and a lot of Muslims felt, not just my mother's family, a lot of Muslims felt like maybe perhaps their agenda was different, and that once the British left, Muslims being the largest minority in India would not be protected. Their rights would not be protected. They felt that way. I mean, that is something which is part of history. And so it was a legitimate concern for them, the way that they saw it. And so they became supporters of the Muslim League. And my grandmother, used to do fundraising for them. And they were very involved in a lot of activism, asking for a separate country. So the only way that for me, not just thinking about the Indian partition, but also thinking about partitions all over the world, and like someone mentioned, this is not just a one-time thing that happened. I mean, Israel-Palestine happened around 1947-48, so it's almost the exact same time frame. The end of the 19th century, all these big colonial empires are crumbling, coming to an end, in decline, and all these lines are being drawn all over the world. So, for example, over the map of Africa, a completely different continent, again, lines being drawn and spheres of influence, being decided. And those lines being drawn not so much on the basis of any kind of indigenous logic, but colonial, what made sense colonially. So this is happening all over the world. And so I feel that people tend to partition when they don't, first of all, and I definitely wanted to make sure that partition would be very specifically and strongly located in the context of colonialism. I think it's embedded in colonialism. But secondly, I also think that people tend to think about walls and partitions and creating new nation states when movements for social justice are not dealt with. So instead of dealing with movements for justice and political, social, economic autonomy, we prefer to simply draw a line and partition and separate people, which doesn't really work. If you look at all of the partitions all over the world, it's not a good long-term solution. So yeah, that's what I can say about that.
Thanks, Mara. And we have last 5 minutes. We have 2 questions. One, Naveed Ahmed in first place, and then we are coming back to you.
Okay. Mara, I'd like to congratulate you first for producing this beautiful and very thought-provoking documentary. I have got one comment and one question very quickly.
Yes.
When we talk about migration, a lot of us sitting in this room, we're also economic immigrants.
Yes.
So whenever one person moves from one place to another, even just from one country to another country, they do leave their friends behind, they do leave their property, and a lot of memories. So it's natural for people to feel that way. Now, my question to you is, you've made this documentary. What is your personal stance on the partition? And secondly,
that's a good question.
What do you want to achieve with this documentary? Pakistan is a reality.
Yes.
It's there to stay.
Absolutely.
Okay?
Absolutely.
Now, what do you want to achieve with this documentary, and realistically?
So the second part of your question I'll address first, which is what do we want to achieve? And I think the way we see the documentary is that it's part of this much larger, broader process of reconciliation, which has always been there. Sometimes it's supported by the governments, sometimes it's not, depending on what's going on politically. But that process, that longing for reconciliation, has always been there. So we want the film to be a part of that process. And then the first part of your question, which is a really good question, what is my personal stance on the partition? That's again a complicated question and with a complicated answer.
You have to be honest, not diplomatic.
No, I'm not at all.
No diplomatic. Considering the audience,
I am honest
because you have to be honest.
It's a very enlightened audience.
Yes, no, absolutely. But like I said, it's a complicated answer. So on the one hand, as a student of history, as someone who understands that nation states are a relatively contemporary idea. They are not the pillars of society, of human society, as we sometimes think. The concept of nation states is not more than 100 years old. So from that perspective, I understand that partitioning, that national borders, that the justification for creating nation states, which is some kind of homogeneity, right? Otherwise, there's no need for them. So they have to be homogeneous. So all of these concepts are very problematic to me as a student of history. But then, as a Pakistani, as someone who was born in a free and independent Pakistan, and with all of the privileges that came with, it becomes a little bit difficult for me to say that the partition should never have happened also, and especially considering the history, my own family history of my mother's family being very involved in the movement asking for a separate nation state. So I also have to look at it from that perspective. And I see what's happening to minorities in India right now, and sometimes, I feel relieved that there was a Pakistan, and I feel lucky to have been born in a Pakistan, in a free Pakistan, where I got the kinds of opportunities that I might not have had I been born in India. in a joint India. So I can look at it from both perspectives.
Thank you very much. And now, to end this very insightful and intriguing event, I'll be requesting our co-chairman and founder of World Congress of Overseas Pakistanis to thank Mara, and at the same time our commentators and our very, very respectful guests. So over to Syed Qamar Azhar.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. First of all, I'm really thankful to Amara and the honorable audience, ladies and gentlemen. Particularly Amara, a wonderful movie, and your passion, and all the way from United States to UK. After watching your movie, just 1 minute comments. I'm lost a bit. I will speak my mind. You was diplomatic, but I'm very clear on this. As you mentioned, 172 million Muslims still live in India. This is a big question. We are here, 1,700 million people in Pakistan and 170 million. Another side is 172 million Muslims still in India. So I'm just thinking about the partition. And while we're living in UK, we have all kind of people living here, Muslims, Christians, Hindus, Sikh, Isai, all kind of people. But we are performing our religious and other activities very well, no objection, no interruption. But if we look back home, still interruption. So I'm confused, but we will address these issues, inshallah, in next meeting, because I think there's another program after this. So I'm really pleased to have you all here, and it's a great time watching this movie. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And once again, reconnecting and repeating the same ideas. And Mara Ahmed, yes, what she said, until we dream, we can't have it. So probably the dream is actually feeling secure, even without walls. And when we can communicate beyond walls or without walls, perhaps that's the time, that's the best time, the best which could come in our lifetime, and probably another couple of 100 years.